One common thing that I've been hearing since the release of Elden Ring is that it's too difficult. People have been saying that everyone should be able to enjoy the game without having to suffer or endure the arduous boss fights. Comments like that bring up two important topics that I want to talk about. The first one being, of course, the difficulty of Elden Ring. And the second one is related to general game design. Okay, so what makes a game difficult? Generally, your gaming experience might look something like this. The game starts off relatively simple, but as new mechanics are introduced and you get further into the game, the difficulty climbs, eventually reaching a climax at the end. This curve will exist in games that have difficulty settings as well, but you can just imagine them on a lower trajectory or higher trajectory depending on the selected setting. Let's look at Resident Evil Village for example. There are 4 different difficulties, but we'll only be looking at the 3 that you can pick at the start: casual, standard, and hardcore. The casual difficulty is aimed at those who really just want to enjoy the story, or for players that may not be as mechanically gifted as someone like myself. I got hit by that! He's got one out! Standard difficulty is exactly how it sounds. It offers enough of a challenge to stimulate the player without making it too difficult to complete the game. And lastly, hardcore is for the players that want to struggle. Enemies will be more difficult and players are supplied with less resources. Now, presumably, just about anyone can pick up Resident Evil Village, play the game, and enjoy themselves in a fashion that's fitting to the experience they are looking for. Could the developers have just created the game with one setting in mind? Sure, but they would have left portions of their players unhappy. And for a game where the primary focus is on the story, it makes sense that you would want this part of the game to be as accessible as possible. Okay, so back to Elden Ring. Elden Ring doesn't have any difficulty settings. And being that it's an open world game means the normal trajectory of difficulty doesn't look quite the same. It could look a little more like this. The peaks and valleys could be even more erratic too, depending on where a player chooses to go and who they choose to fight at any given moment. And this design is what really seemed to upset a lot of people. They saw all their friends really enjoying the game and thought, well, I want to enjoy myself too, so they purchased the game, realized that it was way more difficult than they were expecting, and understandably got upset. I mean, the game is $60 after all. But what experience were these players hoping to get out of the game? Did they just want to enjoy the story at a leisurely pace with little interference? If that's the case, then that was their first mistake. Because while I do think the story is part of the game that the developers wanted players to experience, I don't think it's the primary selling point like it is for Resident Evil Village. In my opinion, the story is one of the worst parts of an otherwise perfect game. The large open world meant you could go anywhere at any time, which often led you to experience the story in a disjointed fashion. Couple this with the cryptic dialogue that only happens when you're aware of certain interactions, and you're often left wondering exactly what the fuck is going on. But maybe that wasn't the problem. Maybe these players just wanted to enjoy the progression of their character in an open world RPG, with some challenges, but not ones that could take literal hours to overcome. Not an unreasonable request, but I believe this experience already exists within Elden Ring. It's just not readily apparent from the start of the game. Elden Ring offers many tools to make the experience significantly easier for the player. First off, the fact that the game is open world means that whenever you come across something that you might feel like is too difficult for the current state of your character, you can just go somewhere else. That's right, you can find some other shit to explore, gain more levels, find more items, come back and make that boss your bitch. But let's say you did all that and you're still struggling. Well, don't worry, because there are these nifty things called spirit ashes, which allow you to summon a spirit companion to fight alongside you. And some of these ashes are incredibly strong, like the Mimic tier, which makes most boss encounters laughably easy. And if you're still struggling, then you can get one of your friends or a random person to come help you, as long as you have access to the internet. And this doesn't even account for the large number of consumable items that give you a tremendous advantage as well. So is Elden Ring too difficult? No, I don't think so at all. With the aforementioned tools, players can get through just about anything with relative ease, and experience Elden Ring in all its glory. I think the problem lies within the first 8 to 15 hours of the game. Players are thrust into this gigantic open world and not really knowing where to go, they don't know all the tools that are available to them quite yet, and they are running into enemies like the Tree Sentinel just after exiting the tutorial. That is, if they were one of the lucky players that found the tutorial. So, to all of you that might be on the fence about purchasing Elden Ring because of the difficulty, just know that you can do it. The tools are there, and at this point there's a metric shit ton of guides to help you through the process, so have at it. Okay, now I want to briefly talk about the second topic. I'm almost 32 years old. I come from a time where people made games that coincided with their visions, regardless of how it impacted who was going to be playing their game. This is something that has become increasingly rare in recent years. Too many games are being created through the lens of profit margins and shareholders, which translates to games being widely accessible but easily forgotten. A major part of what fuels this problem is that too many people feel entitled to things. Everyone feels like they should be able to enjoy everything, and if they can't, then it's an issue that needs to be addressed. And that's just wrong. If you have real life obligations that prevent you from playing a game, then that's too fucking bad. Looks like that game isn't for you. Maybe one day in the future, after you divorce your spouse and you only have to see the kids that you chose to have every other weekend, then you just might have the time to play. Until then, stop making everyone else feel responsible for your lack of time to enjoy certain games and find games that you do have the time to play. Sorry, but it needed to be said. Also, you're not going to enjoy every single game that's made, despite current developers trying their hardest to make everyone enjoy their game, because that means more money for them. Now, back to this idea of creating a game with a specific vision in mind and adhering to that vision despite knowing that everyone can't enjoy it. I believe this is why Elden Ring and many of the other Soul-like games have been so successful. They clearly didn't make these games to appeal to everyone, yet they have reputations for being some of the best combat-oriented games in the industry. And that's because they weren't afraid to take risks. Just like their predecessors, they created games that they wanted to make, not games with the sole purpose of making money or games aimed at keeping players invested in shallow systems with effortless reward loops. Every AAA developer should be taking notes. I'm looking at you, Blizzard. But yeah, in closing, Elden Ring's difficulty is whatever you make it. And we need more games from passionate developers who aren't afraid to take risks. Take it easy, guys.